is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. While I'm always looking for creative uses of chocolate and its ingredients in brewing, the classic dessert stout is still the mainstay of brewing with cacao. Commonly referred to now as pastry stouts, these often high alcohol and high gravity beers recreate popular dessert flavors or create whole new ones, using a range of adjunct ingredients to play off the roasty foundations of the base beer. One of the best and most prolific breweries at brewing pastry stouts is Moksa Brewing in Rocklin, California. If you go to their website, click on beer, and then do a text search for cacao, cocoa, or chocolate, you'll find dozens of examples of their creativity with these ingredients, including First Crack of Dawn, made with maple syrup, candy cap mushrooms, coffee, vanilla beans, and cacao nibs, or Thickest Nibs, made with husks, nibs, and cacao butter. They work with single-origin coffees, cacaos, and vanillas, along with extra flavor ingredients like strawberries or coconut, to create indulgent but precisely executed flavor concepts. Today we're going to talk with Cory Meyer, Moksa's head brewer, to discuss how the brewing team comes up with new concepts and how they utilize ingredients like cacao and vanilla. I started out by asking Cory what role these beers play in Moksa's identity as a brewery.
I'd say they factor pretty heavily into our identity as far as the volume of beer we brew. They're not all that much, but it's definitely the beers that have sort of gone on to gain us some notoriety. Those are the ones that are most memorable and impactful for some people.
And are most of these beers one-off concepts, or do you have recurring brands that you're doing in this space?
It's a little of both. I'd say for the most part, it's new stuff as much as we can think it up. But we do have a handful of recurring beers that we've done 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 times. And that's just, I mean, if you find a flavor combination that really works, there's no reason to really mess with it. So a few of those we definitely done a few times.
And with these beers, you talked about thinking these up. You've got your foundational ingredients that come up a lot: cacao, coffee, vanilla. Beyond that, though, you're using all sorts of different ingredients in different beers. How are you developing these concepts? Do you all sit around just brainstorming, or does somebody bring in a dessert they've had? How does that work?
It's a little bit of anything and everything, really. We try to pull inspiration from different desserts, different like ethnic food desserts. Sometimes have cool ingredients in them. Sometimes the cocktail world has a lot of cool flavor combos that we like to kind of look into and let inspire us. Sometimes it can be sort of tough working with these pastry stouts because really all the same stuff has really been done. I mean, coconut, vanilla, chocolate, you've seen 1,000 iterations of that. And it could be a real challenge to come up with something that's different than the crowd and to stand out from that as something unique.
And do you have a base imperial stout or a few base recipes that you use to build off of, or do you custom build a recipe every concept?
So there's sort of 2 streams of stout that we make. There's the fresh stouts, which are not intended to be barrel aged. Those are always brewed with a specific goal in mind, with a range of flavors or adjuncts that we're planning to treat it with down the road. And so on those, I will design the recipe around kind of where I want that beer to be in the end. And the grain bill may vary somewhat depending on the total flavor profile. We might vary the level of bitterness based on if adjuncts like coffee or cacao are going to be in the beer later on, just to kind of make room for all those flavors to come together in the end.
Well, let's talk about cacao to start out. You use a lot of different single origin cacaos. Where do you source your cacao from typically?
few different places. For a while here, we had this amazing chocolate company called Crew Chocolate that was sourcing all kinds of cacaos, mostly from South America, but they were processing them here in Roseville, just a couple miles from us. And it was just awesome to be able to go over there and try a handful of products and even kind of relay to them what we were looking for out of a particular cacao for a certain beer. And they loved working with us on, piecing together a specific origin, specific roast profile. Unfortunately, about almost a year ago, they were forced to move. Something with their landlord just didn't work out for them, so they moved back to South America. So we don't have quite that local connection anymore. And since then, I've been reaching out to some other connections, namely one of my cellarmen used to know. I think it's called Feast out in Reading. They do a lot of coffee roasting, some cacao, and they've sent us some cacao nib samples that we've really enjoyed and been using a few of theirs in recent years.
You use a lot of different single origin cacaos in different beers. What makes you pick a particular origin? I mean, do those flavors come through directly in a finished beer? What are you looking for when you're selecting an origin?
Mainly overall flavor profile. So sometimes you want something that's really spicy and complex, something that's really fruity, something that's more indicative of a very high-end boutique chocolate bar. Sometimes you want something that just tastes like a Hershey bar. It there's really no single origin or go-to that's a winner for us. It's a matter of just trying things for every single beer with the goal in mind. I'd say in general, a couple parameters that I'm looking for is a low level of acidity and a low level of bitterness coming off the nibs, because those are the two things that can kind of get out of hand pretty quickly when infused in a beer.
Do you find that the aromas and flavors you're getting from the cacao come through pretty directly into the finished beer, or does that alter a little bit in the process?
It depends on the beer. Sometimes the cacao is just sort of a finishing top note amongst other ingredients. Sometimes it's a bigger player, but I do feel that the character of it really does come through quite well. Especially when I do cacao infusions, we like to use a pretty high dosing rate and sort of a shorter contact time. I feel like that gives us that big punch of flavor before the things like the excessive bitterness start to leach into the beer.
And so are you recirculating on those during secondary, or how are you going about that?
Usually they are in secondary on a recirculation. Cacao, along with coffee, is usually the very last thing to go in. We'll infuse certain ingredients warm or at room temperature. But before we will infuse cacao or coffee, we will chill the beer down to about 40 degrees. Sort of the same theory as making a cold brew coffee. You're pulling some of those flavors and aromatics without some of the more intense pieces that go along with it. And it's generally a fairly short infusion time.
Just a couple days.
More like 4 to 8 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So usually we'll chill the beer down the night before, come in the morning, add our cacao, start it moving over those nibs, and just start tasting it throughout the day. And once it arrives at where we want it to be, we just push it out of the infusion tank, off those ingredients, and lock it in.
I've noticed on a couple beers, in addition to nibs, you're also using husks. What do you get differently from those two products?
The husks was something that was introduced to us by Crew Chocolate. They're kind of notoriously just a waste product from the cacao processing stream, and they just sort of offered us these huge, massive trash bags full of cacao husks for free, and we're like, okay, sure, we'll try it. So we put those in the mash on a couple beers, and was quite a bit of flavor carry through. I think the husk is basically just fiber, but it tends to soak up a lot of the cacao butter that kind of comes out of the bean during roasting. So there's quite a bit of flavor in there.
Speaking of butter, I saw at least one beer, Thickest Nibs, where you're actually using cocoa butter. I haven't seen too many breweries doing that. What was your process for using that?
That was just one of those things where you gotta try every approach to an ingredient and see what sticks. That was one we did with Bottle Logic a couple years ago, and added some pretty large bricks of cacao butter straight into the whirlpool, I believe. Um, which of course seems like a crazy thing to do, just adding chunks of fat into a stout.
Right.
But the flavor is there. I don't know that we'd do it again, and we haven't, but it made for a good picture, and there was some flavor carry through. These days, if I add chocolate hot side, it's usually some nibs in the mash, just for ease of processing. And the other kind of drawback with the husks is there's I've heard there's some concern of the husks being that which kind of captures some of the like like when they're being transported on the truck, it's the husk that is exposed to the outer environment, the toxins, the road debris, what have you. I don't know how much stock there is in that, but and I didn't find their character or flavor to be off-putting in any way, but it gives us a little pause.
Sure. Yeah. And you're doing the husks the same way you would the nibs, just recirculating?
No, those only on the hot side in the mash.
Okay.
The husks are they take up a lot of room, so I don't think we have a vessel large enough to treat those downstream.
So you're also using a lot of different single origin vanillas. Talk to me about some of the interesting ones you've used there.
Yeah, through the years we used quite a number. I doubt I can even recall all the origins. We're lucky to have a great supplier that sources beans from all around the world, and has at any given time at least 50 different varieties for us to choose from. Trying to think, over the years, we really liked some beans from Mexico, Veracruz, Comoros. There's been some really nice ones from Brazil. Costa Rica has been really nice. Hawaii. I want to say Australia we used one time. I could be wrong. Tahitian, Congo, and one beer recently we did with Cook Island vanilla beans for the first time, and was really, really impressed with the character of those as well. So again, like cacao, it's not like there's one origin that's the magic bullet. It's more of trying each crop year of each variety, and kind of seeing what works in terms of potency of aroma and flavor, and also character, and kind of just tasting through them or smelling through them with the beer's goal in mind, and then piecing that together.
Are you just cutting open whole beans and putting those into secondary, or what do you do with those?
There's a couple different ways we infuse beans. If it's a recirculated infusion, which we'll normally do on non-barrel aged beers, I'll take a few pounds of, well, depending on the volume, take some vanilla beans and blend them up into a coarse kind of mess. It's lots of small particles. And then I will typically pack those into a sous vide bag and pasteurize them overnight, because I've heard from a lot of colleagues and that there's a number of bugs and bacteria that like to live on those. The vanilla beans are not typically refrigerated after they're cured, so certainly some risk of contamination there. But we pasteurize them at 160 for about 16 hours, and then when it's time to go into the beer, we'll just pop those bags open and go right into the treatment tank. The second way we'll infuse those is a bit more labor intensive, but we do this on barrel aged beers. We will manually split and scrape every single bean, and then I'll take all the extracted caviar and kind of mix that around with a little bit of ethanol for sanitization, and then those that kind of caviar slurry and the beans themselves go right into the barrel for about 2 to 4 months. And I find that the character of that extraction is really rich and full. So we prefer to do that on barrel aged beers where we really want it to count. But it is a lot of work.
I imagine. The aromatics of single origin vanillas seem like they can be so delicate. Do you find that those nuances are really able to transfer to the finished beer? Is the taster going to notice that this is a different vanilla when they taste a beer?
I think so. I mean, maybe if you didn't know it was different, maybe you wouldn't pick up on it, but I'm always surprised at the variety of character that comes out of different origin beans. I mean, there's of course classic Madagascar vanilla, which has a really buttery, almost brownie like a classic baking extract. Those are very recognizable to most people. Some of the more exotic beans that we use have a range of aromas like chocolate, caramel, spices, fruits, you name it, really. There was one variety we used last year actually in a sour beer. Um,
Hmm.
the origin was East Timor, and we picked those beans because the flavors on those were very atypical of a classic like brownie vanilla, but was very floral, tropical, fruity, and the aroma on those was pretty surprising. And we used those in a beer that was a kettle sour that had no fruit in it, so we
Hmm.
were leaning on floral and vanilla and citrus elements to kind of drive the flavors, and it worked really well in there.
That's really interesting. Did you have people tasting that and wondering if there was fruit in it?
I think so. We tried to make a big deal of the fact there was not, because of course, you know, every kettle sour you've ever had is usually a fruit bomb, and we wanted to kind of do something a bit different. But definitely there were some cool flavors in there. I think elderflower was kind of the leading flavor there, with some vanilla, orange blossom water, and such in the background.
That's really interesting. So when you're building one of these beers, especially if you're using multiple different adjunct ingredients, is your hope to highlight the character of these individual origins of cacao, coffee, vanilla, or are you wanting them to just kind of create a single flavor profile together where maybe people aren't going to pick apart individual ingredients?
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This fifth issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers.
There's definitely certain beers where we've taken a strong focus on a particular ingredient, like cacao or vanilla, and really tried to highlight the uniqueness of a particular origin or a blend of origins. I'd say for most of the beers we do, it's a blend of two, three, four different adjuncts in there. So really, I think the main goal is the overall profile. Not to say that the individual origins of ingredients don't shine through, but we definitely pick those with the bigger picture in mind.
Why don't you pick one or two beers and just kind of walk us through from concept to completion, something that, interested you along the way?
Yeah, actually, First Crack of Dawn was a pretty fun one. That was a non-barrel aged stout that I did maybe 6 months ago, something like that. The goal being kind of the classic breakfast stout: coffee, maple, vanilla beans. But I wanted to add a little bit of twist on that and incorporate some candy cap mushrooms to sort of bolster the maple flavor. That's an ingredient that we used one time before in the past, and had been really surprised with the character and intensity of the maple that came through from those. So that beer started with a fairly standard stout base, but on the grist, definitely dialed back on the roasted malts and the bitterness because I wanted to hit that pretty heavily with coffee and needed to make room for that roasty bitter flavor that was going to fill in later. Then after the beer was fermented, I don't remember if we centrifuged or filtered that, but I do like to clean up the beer as much as possible before incorporating any adjuncts. First thing to go in was vanilla beans. Those were blended, pasteurized, and infused for I think about a week at room temperature. Oh, and in the whirlpool, we did use about 10 gallons of some grade B maple syrup. Oh, the candy caps as well were infused with the vanilla. That's another ingredient that can be infused for some time. So when the vanilla and the maple character was about where we wanted it, we chilled the beer down, added a pretty hefty dose of coffee that we got from Moksa Coffee in San Diego, who we work with for pretty much all our coffee beers. They're a great partner to work with on coffee beers. The beer or the coffee itself is exceptional, but they're very knowledgeable about what about coffee and what roasts of coffee work well in beer. And it's really great to be able to lean on them a little bit and say, I want a blend that is just like, a classic cup of Joe, but bold, rich, not too out there in terms of fruitiness or anything like that. And they're always just like, I got you. The coffee gets infused into chilled beer, usually for somewhere between like 8 to 24 hours, depending on the flavor, really. That's another one that we'll just taste every couple hours as it's infusing. And it can be pretty surprising when from the first infusion of coffee, as you go throughout the day, the flavors can really just pick up. And there really is a sweet spot where you get all those rich, amazing coffee notes before it starts to get any of that sort of acrid, over extracted type of coffee. And so when we hit that sweet spot, we just push the beer off the coffee and lock that in, and was pretty happy with that one. I think the maple character from the candy caps is always surprising to me. Those are a really fun ingredient. Those are another one that we kind of crumble up and pasteurize before infusing. I picked one of the mushrooms up and kind of rubbed it between my fingers, and I could smell maple on my hands for 2 days afterwards. It was pretty wild. And the infusion rate on those is very, very small. I think it was 6 ounces of dried mushrooms into nearly 300 gallons of beer. Oh, sorry, about 10 ounces, but still a relatively tiny addition. And the flavor is absolutely there. So ingredients like that are a lot of fun to come across. Something that is maybe not super common in the world of adjunct stouts, but we kind of stumbled upon and have really fallen in love with.
Yeah, that sounds like a fascinating beer. How are these making it out into the world? Are these taproom only, or do you have a bottle club? How do you get these sort of high concept, high gravity stouts out there?
They are mostly here at the taproom. We sell all our bottles in person on a Saturday morning when we release them. The fresh stouts will typically kind of be available in the taproom for a few weeks or so. We don't really ever ship or distribute bottles except for very, very special occasions. We just like to have those kind of be something special that you have to come here to get. And the bottle runs are quite small. A typical bottle run for us is maybe 200 to 600 bottles. So we're a lot smaller brewery than I think most people realize. So small releases and barrel age releases, same deal, always in person. Those are typically selling out day of. We'll sometimes get a line for those depending on how excited people are about it. We do have a membership as well, which gets 3 separate exclusive beers made for them throughout the year. And they sometimes get early access to bottle sales as well.
Yeah, it sounded like from the batch size earlier, you're at 10 barrel.
Yeah, 10 barrel brew house. So a fresh stout release is usually a 10 barrel, and then a barrel age release is anywhere from 1 to 4 oak barrels blended.
Yeah, despite not being a large part of your volume, I imagine there's a pretty rabid fandom around these beers in your local area.
Yeah, you could say that. Those are definitely the ones that people know us for and get excited about. Nobody's lining up out the front door for an IPA can anymore, but they're still turning out for the stouts.
Well, do you have a personal favorite of these types of beers that you've brewed?
I'd say probably my favorite is the non-adjuncted stouts that we do. We've got a reasonable barrel program, typically around 100, 120 barrels going at any given time. And we love to do releases called Singularity, which are single barrel, no adjunct. And as we're tasting through our barrels, as they kind of come of age, and if there's one that just really shines on its own, or maybe sometimes two that constitute a really good blend together, we will absolutely release those as is with no treatment. And those that really show off the barrel character, just in its truest form, are definitely among my favorites.
Sure. Are there any particularly interesting barrel-aged adjunct stouts where you feel like the adjuncts have interacted with the barrel character in a noteworthy way?
Yeah, I think probably the best companion for barrel character, I would say, is vanilla. It's kind of a natural partner there because you can really pull a lot of vanilla flavor out of the oak itself on certain toasts, certain barrel toasts, and a good vanilla infusion can kind of really serve to just fit right in with that flavor profile, kind of enhancing some of that vanilla notes and also bringing in sometimes spices, other elements that are somewhat natural to those barrel aged beers, specifically bourbon barrel aging. And when those come together nicely, it can be really something special. That's one where we'll definitely be thoughtful about the origin or varietal of vanilla that pairs with a particular beer, and just trying to kind of put those together in the best way possible.
Do you have any concepts for these pastry stouts that you still want to try? Something you haven't gotten the chance to get to yet?
That is a tough one. I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's finding those new ideas that is the challenge. I really wish I had a long laundry list of fresh new ideas to try out, but really it's a matter of kind of scrounging for inspiration anywhere we can find it and just kind of doing it on the fly. It's it can be really tough to find a new combination. It's really all been done, and I think the trick is doing it in a more memorable way, or in a way that is maybe a little bit more exciting than somebody else has. But it's tough these days. There are a lot of really, really great stout producers out there now, which I think is great for everybody, but it can be a challenge.
Sure. Well, the last question I always like to ask is about the story that a particular beer or brewery is telling. What story do you feel like you're telling with these adjunct stouts?
I think the story is just big flavors. People tell me sometimes when they drink our stouts that they're surprised how well balanced they are, which is a crazy thing to hear considering how much residual sugar is in some of these stouts. By any traditional sense, these are so far beyond balance that it's laughable. But we do try to kind of temper that with things like bitterness, with things like cacao, coffee, barrel aging character, and I think what our goal is for those beers is sort of a balance where everything is at 11 with just amplified sweetness, amplified flavors, amplified bitterness, and so that it drinks like a confection, but doesn't drink like sugar syrup. And I think when we're able to hit that mark, it can be pretty tasty.
Well, I've had the chance to try just a couple of your beers in the past, I believe at Denver Rare Beer Tasting
Oh,
a
cool.
few years back. But one of these times I got to get out there to the tap room itself, try some of these at the spot of origin.
Yeah, please do. I think at the moment we have 8 different imperial stouts on the board, which is a bit more than usual, but we like it when we can really showcase a lot of those, and because there's some of the more exciting things that we're doing.
If you're in the Sacramento area, check out Moksa's tap room and try some of these creative pastry stouts. You can find out more about Moksa in the show notes. Thanks to Cory for coming on the show today, and to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.